The night felt colder than usual, the air thick with a strange kind of tension. I pulled into the dimly lit gas station, my headlights flickering against the grimy pavement. The city around me was still awake in its own way. Cars rushing past in the distance, neon signs buzzing with electric life, the occasional echo of laughter from drunken strangers stumbling out of bars. I should have gone straight home. Instead, I stepped out of my car, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing against my shoulders. The gas station smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap beer, the fluorescent lights above casting an artificial glow over everything. I swiped my car at the pump and shoved the nozzle into the tank. That's when I felt it. A presence. Someone was watching me. I turned my head slightly, pretending to scratch my neck as I scanned the parking lot. And then I saw him. A man stood near the entrance of the convenience store, his body half hidden in the shadows. He was tall, too thin, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. His face was obscured by the hood of his jacket, but I could feel his eyes on me. My heart gave a small, uneasy thump. It wasn't just his stare that unsettled me. It was the way he stood, completely still like a statue, his presence too deliberate, too unnatural. I turned back to my car, forcing myself to ignore him. Just a crazy guy. A junkie, maybe. Not my problem. The pump clicked, signaling my tank was full. I replaced the nozzle and started walking toward the store. I needed a coffee, something to keep me awake for the short drive home. As I stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled. The cashier barely glanced up from his phone. The store was mostly empty, just rows of half-stocked shelves and a faint smell of overcooked hot dogs. I grabbed a black coffee and made my way to the counter. As I reached for my wallet, a low voice rasped from behind me. "Look for her underwear, and the truth will be clear." I froze. A slow, creeping chill crawled up my spine. The voice was too close, the words sinking into my skin like ice. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. I scanned the store, my pulse hammering. The door hadn't opened. The cashier was still glued to his phone, oblivious. Had I imagined it? I swallowed hard, shaking off the unease, and paid for my coffee. As I walked outside, I glanced toward the spot where the hooded man had been standing. He was gone. The parking lot was empty. Not a single trace of him remained. The drive home. The coffee tasted bitter on my tongue as I pulled onto the highway. I tried to brush off what had happened at the gas station, but the words stuck in my mind, repeating themselves over and over. Look for her underwear, and the truth will be clear. It was nonsense. Some lunatic whispering creepy shit to strangers. And yet, my hands gripped the wheel tighter. I wasn't usually a paranoid man. I trusted my wife. Olivia and I had been married for 7 years, and while things weren't perfect, I never doubted her loyalty. But something about that whisper, it wasn't just the words. It was the way they felt, like a warning I couldn't shake. By the time I pulled into our driveway, my mind was a mess of uneasy thoughts. The house was dark except for the faint glow of a lamp in the living room window. Olivia was probably already asleep. I hesitated before stepping inside. A strange thought crept into my mind. Would it be crazy to check? To look? I swallowed, shaking my head. This is ridiculous. And yet, as I walked through the front door, my feet moved on their own. Straight to our bedroom. Straight to her dresser. The discovery. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of Olivia's breathing. She was curled up on her side, deep in sleep. Her long brown hair spread over the pillow. She looked so peaceful, so untouched by the storm raging inside my head. I stood frozen in the doorway for a moment, my pulse thudding. Then, slowly, I stepped forward. I didn't even know what I was looking for. I crouched beside her dresser, my fingers brushing against the smooth wood. My mouth was dry as I reached for the handle. This is insane. I pulled it open. A neat row of folded clothes greeted me. Lace and silk, delicate fabrics that smelled faintly of her perfume. Nothing strange, nothing unusual. Then my eyes flickered to the back of the drawer. A small white box sat there. Something about it felt wrong. I reached for it, my breath catching in my throat. The cardboard was smooth beneath my fingers as I lifted the lid, and my heart stopped. Inside the box were two things. A lacy black thong, one I'd never seen her wear before, and an unfamiliar hotel key card. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick, suffocating. I swallowed, my throat tightening. My fingers curled around the key card, flipping it over in my palm. A hotel name was printed on it, one I recognized, because it was less than 10 miles from our house. I stared at it, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I turned my head slowly toward Olivia, still sleeping soundly, her body rising and falling with each breath. A sickening realization twisted in my gut. She wasn't just hiding something. She was hiding him. The hotel key card sat in my palm like a piece of burning coal. My fingers curled around it, my heart beat a relentless hammer against my ribs. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring down at the evidence in my hands. The black lace thong I'd never seen before, the key card from a hotel barely 10 miles away. I should have felt anger. I should have felt rage. Instead, I felt something much worse. Doubt. Because the moment you start questioning the person you love, you also start questioning yourself. Had I been blind all this time? Had there been signs I ignored? I slowly placed the box back in the drawer, my hands moving on autopilot. My pulse was still pounding, my breath uneven, but I forced myself to think. Rushing into confrontation would be a mistake. No, I needed more. More proof. More certainty. I needed to know who. I needed to know how long. And, most importantly, I needed to know why. The morning after, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of her. Olivia's soft laughter, the way she kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, the way she pulled me close in bed at night. Was all of it a lie? When the alarm buzzed at 7 a.m., I pretended to wake up just like any other day. Olivia stirred beside me, stretching with a small sigh before rolling over to face me. "Morning," she murmured, her voice still thick with sleep. I turned my head slowly, studying her. The sunlight streaming through the curtains cast a golden glow over her skin. She looked so normal, so familiar. I forced a smile. "Morning." She smiled back and pressed a soft kiss against my jaw before slipping out of bed. I watched her pull on her robe, moving around the room like it was just another ordinary day. But it wasn't, because I knew something she didn't know. The first clue. At breakfast, Olivia was the same as always. She hummed softly as she poured her coffee, scrolling through her phone. I sat across from her, pretending to focus on my own cup, but my mind was a tangled mess. Say something. Ask her. But how do you accuse someone of something without proof? I needed to be careful. If she realized I was suspicious, she'd start hiding her tracks. Instead, I went for something subtle. "Hey," I said casually, stirring my coffee. "I might be working late tonight. Maybe we can grab dinner tomorrow instead." She glanced up, a small furrow forming between her brows. "Late? Yeah. Big client project. Might be stuck at the office until 10 or 11. Olivia hesitated. It was quick, so quick that if I hadn't been watching closely, I would have missed it. A flicker of something in her eyes. Relief? I kept my face neutral, sipping my coffee. She nodded. "Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense." That was it. No complaints. No questions. "No, I'll wait up for you." If she was cheating, tonight might be the night she thought I wouldn't be home. And that gave me the perfect opportunity. The plan. I left for work as usual, but my mind was nowhere near my office. Every second that ticked by felt like a countdown to something big. I told my boss I needed to leave early. By 5 p.m., I was already sitting in my car waiting. At 7 p.m., Olivia texted me. "Olivia, hope work isn't too stressful. Love you." I stared at the screen for a long time before typing back. "Me, love you too." Lie. At 8 p.m., I parked down the street from our house. I left my car a block away and walked, my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited. At exactly 8:37 p.m., Olivia's car pulled out of the driveway. I stepped into the shadows as she drove past, my hands clenched into fists. She wasn't heading to the grocery store. She wasn't meeting friends. She was going somewhere else. To someone else. And I was going to find out who. As Olivia's taillights disappeared into the night, I exhaled slowly, trying to steady my racing pulse. I'd known something was wrong, but seeing her drive away, alone at night, it made everything real. There was no more room for doubt. She was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. I hurried back to my car, keeping a safe distance as I pulled onto the road behind her. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, my heart pounding like a war drum. I kept my headlights off as long as I could. I wasn't some trained detective. I was just a man who never thought he'd have to spy on his own wife. Yet here I was, following her. Where was she going? Olivia took an unexpected turn, heading toward downtown instead of any place she'd normally go. Not the gym, not her office, not her best friend's house. I felt sick. A few more turns, and I realized exactly where she was going. A hotel. A small but upscale boutique hotel, tucked away near the waterfront. She pulled into the parking lot and drove toward the back. I did the same, making sure to stay out of sight. She parked, sat still for a moment. Then, finally, she stepped out of the car. My breath caught in my throat as I watched her. She looked different. Chapter 3 continued following the lies. She looked different, not like a woman running errands, not like a wife missing her husband. She stepped out of the car with an air of calm certainty, adjusting the hem of her dress, smoothing her hair. The soft glow of the hotel's entrance lights framed her in an almost cinematic way. Too perfect, too practiced. This wasn't the first time she had done this. My stomach churned. I sank lower into my seat, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every part of me wanted to storm out of the car, call her name, demand the truth. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I watched. She walked toward the hotel entrance, her heels clicking softly against the pavement. She didn't hesitate. She knew exactly where she was going. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of her just before she disappeared inside. My fingers trembled as I stared at the screen. This was it. This was proof. But I needed more. I needed to know who she was meeting. The elevator ride to the truth. I parked my car further down the lot and stepped out, my heartbeat in my throat. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of the ocean mixed with something sharper, the scent of betrayal. I entered the lobby, keeping my head low. A young woman at the front desk barely glanced at me as I made my way toward the elevators. I had no idea what floor Olivia had gone to. I had no idea what room. But then I saw it. A glint of silver on the floor near the elevator doors. A hotel key card. I bent down, pretending to tie my shoe as I slid it into my palm. It was labeled Room 714. Coincidence? Or had Olivia dropped it in her hurry to get upstairs? Either way, it was my way in. The door that shouldn't be opened. I rode the elevator up, the number 714 burning in my mind. My gut told me I wasn't ready for what was behind that door. But I had to know. When the elevator dinged, I stepped out, my breath shallow. The hallway was quiet, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of my footsteps. I stopped in front of room 714. My wife was in there, with someone else. I pressed my ear against the door, my pulse hammering. Voices. A man's voice. Low, familiar. And Olivia's. Soft, nervous, but affectionate. I clenched my jaw. My fingers curled around the key card. My body tensed as I slid it through the lock. Click. The door unlocked. This was it. I pushed it open, and what I saw on the other side shattered my entire world. The door swung open with a quiet click, revealing the dimly lit hotel room. For a moment, neither of them noticed me. The room smelled of perfume, Olivia's perfume, mixed with the faint scent of expensive cologne. The soft glow of a bedside lamp cast long shadows against the walls. And in the middle of the room, she stood close to him. Too close. She wasn't undressed. She wasn't tangled in bed sheets. But she didn't have to be. The intimacy in their posture, the way her body angled toward his, the tension in the air, it all told me everything I needed to know. She had come here to be with him. She had come here without hesitation. And then, as if sensing me, Olivia turned her head. Her face paled instantly. Ethan. Her voice cracked, a mixture of shock and guilt. The man beside her stiffened. I finally got a good look at him, and when I did, a new kind of rage surged through me. Because it wasn't just some random stranger. It was James, my best friend. A silence that screams. No one moved. No one spoke. James' eyes darted between Olivia and me, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. He knew. He knew there was no excuse, no explanation that could make this right. I took a slow step forward, my breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. My chest burned, my hands clenched into fists. James finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, listen. Shut up." It wasn't a yell. It wasn't a plea. It was a command, one that even he knew better than to ignore. I turned to Olivia. She was trembling, her hands clutched together like she was trying to hold herself together. "How long?" I asked, my voice low, steady. She flinched. "Ethan, how long?" Her lips parted, but nothing came out. That told me everything. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head. My stomach churned, my vision blurred at the edges. I had given Olivia everything. Years of loyalty, devotion, love. And yet, she had chosen this. Him, my best friend. A man who had stood beside me at our wedding. A man who had toasted to our happiness, to our future. A man who had probably been sleeping with my wife for God knows how long. James opened his mouth again, but I was already moving. Before I even realized what I was doing, my fist connected with his jaw. The breaking point. James stumbled backward, crashing into the nightstand. The lamp tumbled to the floor, the bulb shattering with a sharp pop. Olivia screamed, rushing between us. "Ethan, stop." But I wasn't listening. James wiped his mouth, wincing as blood trickled from the corner of his lip. His expression flickered between guilt and defensiveness, and that only made me angrier. He wasn't sorry. Not really. He was sorry he got caught. "Did you love her?" I asked, my voice raw. James hesitated. Too long. That was enough. I lunged again, shoving him hard against the wall. The impact rattled the cheap artwork hanging behind him. "Did you love her?" I demanded. "Ethan, stop it." Olivia grabbed my arm, trying to pull me back. Her touch, the same touch I'd craved for years, felt disgusting now. I yanked away from her, breathing heavily. James didn't answer. And maybe that was the worst part. Maybe the silence hurt more than if he had just admitted it. The coldest goodbye. I turned to Olivia, my vision swimming. I had spent years loving this woman, building a life with her, trusting her. And now here we were, strangers. She reached for me again, her eyes pleading. "Ethan, please, I shook my head. "I don't want to hear it." She flinched, her breath catching. I turned toward the door, my pulse roaring in my ears. "Ethan, don't walk away like this," she choked out. "Please, we could talk." I laughed bitterly. "Talk." I looked at her one last time, the woman I had loved, the woman I had given everything to. And then I said the words that ended it all. "You made your choice, Olivia. Now I'm making mine." And with that, I walked out. Not just out of the hotel, but out of her life. The night air was sharp and cold, but I barely felt it. I walked to my car in a daze, my mind blank, my body moving on autopilot. The hotel's parking lot was almost empty. The distant hum of traffic, the only sound in the silence that followed me. It was over. My marriage. My friendship. My life as I knew it. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved as I fought the urge to scream, to punch something, to destroy anything that could match the way I felt inside. But instead, I just sat there, staring, breathing, trying to understand how I had been so blind. A house that no longer feels like home. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the house looked different. It wasn't ours anymore. It wasn't a place of love, of shared dreams, of quiet moments filled with unspoken understanding. It was just a building, a place where betrayal had grown in the dark, right under my nose. I stepped inside, my keys jingling in my shaking hand. The familiar scent of Olivia's perfume still lingered in the air. I hated it. I wanted to burn it out of my lungs. I walked through the house, past the framed wedding photos on the wall, past the couch where we had curled up together, the kitchen where we had cooked side by side, laughing over stupid inside jokes. Every room felt like a lie. My stomach twisted as I entered our bedroom. No, not ours. Not anymore. I stared at the bed, the same bed we had shared for years, the same bed where she had slept beside me, whispered "I love you" in the dark, held me when I felt like the world was too much. Had she been thinking about James while lying next to me? Had she ever let him into this house? Into this bed? The thought made my skin crawl. I couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. The things she left behind. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started stuffing clothes into it. I didn't care what I packed. I just needed to leave. But as I reached into the dresser, my fingers brushed against something soft, something that didn't belong to me. I pulled it out. Lace. Red. Delicate. I frowned. Olivia didn't wear red lingerie. She always stuck to soft, neutral tones. She said red was too much. Too bold. Then why was it here? A cold realization crept up my spine. Look for her underwear, and the truth will be clear. The stranger's words echoed in my head, like a whisper from the past coming back to haunt me. I rummaged deeper into the drawer, pulling out things I had never seen before. Lingerie. Expensive. Risky. Bought for someone else. Not me. I clenched my jaw, a fresh wave of nausea hitting me. How long had this been going on? How many nights had I fallen asleep thinking she was mine, while she was giving herself to someone else? I dropped the lace onto the floor like it was poisoned. I couldn't do this. Not here. I needed air. A night that wouldn't end. I drove without knowing where I was going. I just needed to move, to get as far away from that house as possible. At some point, I ended up at a bar. The kind of place that smelled like cheap whiskey and lost dreams. I sat at the counter, running a hand over my face. The bartender glanced at me. "You look like you've had a rough night." I laughed, the sound hollow. "You have no idea." He poured a glass without asking what I wanted. I took a slow sip, feeling the burn slide down my throat. I needed to forget, just for a while. But I knew I never would. I could drown in whiskey, lose myself in the buzz of alcohol and empty conversation. But nothing would erase the image of Olivia standing in that hotel room. Nothing would take away the sound of my own voice, breaking as I asked how long. Nothing would undo what she had done. And worst of all, I still loved her. Even now, even after everything. And I hated myself for it. The whiskey burned as it slid down my throat, but it did nothing to numb the pain. I sat at the bar, staring at my reflection in the mirror behind the shelves of liquor. The man looking back at me was a stranger, eyes hollow, face tight with exhaustion. I had lost something tonight. Not just my marriage. Not just Olivia. I had lost myself. Somewhere between the love, the betrayal, and the ugly truth, I had become someone I no longer recognized. And I didn't know if I could ever find my way back. The weight of the past. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring into my drink. Minutes? Hours? Time felt meaningless. But eventually, I heard a voice beside me. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world." I turned my head and saw an older man, probably in his 60s, nursing a glass of bourbon. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his eyes filled with a kind of sadness I recognized. He had been here before, maybe not in this exact situation, but in the place where I was now. Broken, lost, trying to figure out what the hell to do next. I let out a bitter laugh. "Feels like it." He took a slow sip, studying me. "It's about a woman, isn't it?" I exhaled sharply. "Isn't it always?" He nodded knowingly. "Did she break your heart?" "She didn't just break it. She shattered it." But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I swirled the whiskey in my glass and murmured, "She broke something, and I don't know if I can fix it." He was quiet for a. I left the bar before the sun came up, my mind racing, my chest aching. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't numb. I was clear. For the first time in days, I knew what I had to do. I drove back home, not to stay, but to leave the right way. I parked in the driveway, the house looming before me like a giant that held the last remnants of my shattered life. The lights inside were off, but I knew she was still there, sleeping in the bed we once shared. A bed that now felt like a foreign place, tainted with lies, with betrayal, and with things I would never be able to unsee or forget. I stood there for a long moment, just looking at the house. This was it. There was no going back after this. A decision made. I took a deep breath, the cold night air biting at my skin, but it was refreshing. It felt like a new beginning, one that I had waited for without even realizing it. I gathered my things, the few belongings I had kept, and made my way up to the front door. My hands trembled as I turned the handle. The familiar creak of the door as it opened was the last sound I heard before stepping inside for what would be the final time. I moved through the house, quietly, my footsteps heavy with finality. And then I stood in front of our bedroom door. I had to face her. The confrontation. I pushed the door open, and for a brief moment, I just stood there, watching her sleep. The way the moonlight caught her face, the soft rise and fall of her breath. She looked so innocent, but I knew better. I knew the truth. Her lies were buried deep beneath the surface, tangled with the promises she had made to me. Promises she had broken without hesitation. I could feel the anger rising within me. But more than that, I felt the overwhelming sense of betrayal. This was the woman I had trusted the most. I had given her my heart, my life, and she had given me a lie in return. I walked closer, my steps deliberate, my resolve strengthening. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding her gaze as she saw me standing there. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice groggy. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk. The truth comes out." I sat on the edge of the bed, facing her. She looked at me, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "You've been lying to me, Olivia," I said, my voice low but steady. Her face paled. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "I already know." The silence stretched between us like a chasm, filled with the weight of everything we had both ignored for so long. "How long?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. She didn't answer at first. Then, finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I never meant for it to happen, but it did. I shook my head, the anger rising again. "How long, Olivia?" "Almost a year," she admitted, the words hanging heavy in the air. "A year." I couldn't process it. My mind couldn't wrap around the idea that for an entire year she had been deceiving me, lying to my face every single day. "You betrayed me," I said, the pain in my chest sharp, almost unbearable. "You betrayed everything we had." "I'm sorry," she said, but it sounded empty, as if the apology was just another way to smooth over the cracks she had created. I stood up abruptly. "Sorry doesn't fix this." She reached out, her hand trembling as she tried to grab mine. "Please, don't leave me. I love you." I pulled my hand away, stepping back. "You don't love me. Not the way I loved you." She stared at me, tears welling up in her eyes. "Please," she whispered again. But it was too late. The final decision. I turned toward the door, my hand on the handle. My heart felt heavy, as though it was dragging me down with every step I took. But I knew there was no other choice. I was done. I couldn't stay with someone who had shattered my trust beyond repair. I walked out of the room, out of the house, and out of her life. For good. And as I drove away, the weight of the decision settled over me. It hurt more than I had ever imagined, but deep down, I knew it was the only way to move forward. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the faintest spark of hope. The end of this chapter of my life was just the beginning of something else. And maybe, just maybe, I would find the strength to heal.